For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Batend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we feature leaders of the cannabis industry. We talk to everyone from farmers to CEOs and public officials, anyone making an impact on the cannabis community and beyond. When Dr. Janice Knox first read about the endocannabinoid system, she says that it gave her the shivers. As a curious-minded person, the potential that it represented for better understanding some of the biggest mysteries about human physiology, it was that powerful to her. Today, Dr. Knox is CEO of the Doctors Knox Incorporated. That's right, Doctors Knox. Both Janice's husband and her two daughters are all doctors specializing in cannabinoid medicine. In addition to being the CEO of the Doctors Knox, she's also the co-founder of the American Cannabinoid Clinics and the co-founder of the Advent Academy. But back when she first discovered the endocannabinoid system for herself, Dr. Knox was, like a lot of her peers, incredibly skeptical about the merits of cannabis as medicine. That is, until she actually met the people that were asking for it. Dr. Knox, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Before the entire family was involved with the business, you were kind of the originator of the Doctors Knox. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely correct. I started the whole thing. And my story is a strange story. Well, strange, maybe a little different, I should call it, a little different. And I like to go back to the very beginning. I grew up in Richmond, California, one of 15 children. I was the fourth of 15 children. So there were 11 other people behind me in a very tiny house. But my father was very hardworking, as was my mother, but they were also very, very religious, which meant we didn't do drugs. We didn't speak of drugs. So really, my father sort of convinced us that anything like that or going near that or anybody who did that, you were sort of doomed to burn in hell for all your life or eternity. So I never really thought about marijuana at the time. I ended up going to UC Berkeley as an undergraduate. And if you know anything about the Cal culture, then you know part of that culture, student culture, was drugs, right? Including marijuana. Well, I got through 4 years of Cal. I had a great time there, did what all students do, except I never saw marijuana. I didn't know anybody who used it. My friends didn't use it. I could not have described the plant to you. I knew absolutely nothing. And I attribute that to the upbringing that I had with my very religious and strict father.
Wow.
So fast forward 30 years where I went through medical school at University of Washington and did my residency in anesthesia. So I spent 30 plus years as a board certified anesthesiologist. I called ourselves legalized drug pushers. But as I got ready to retire, I started looking into what was really happening around me. And so I started off doing things like bioidentical hormones because I could see people getting sicker and, heavier and on pages of drugs. And we would do lots of surgeries that I now consider still topical treatments because we weren't getting at the root cause. And so as I retired, I was invited to work in one of these cannabis card clinics a physician had abruptly left. And at first I hesitated. And I hesitated for two reasons. Number one, I didn't know anything about cannabis. I was still that girl from Cal who never saw it. But number two, I had colleagues who had disappeared for months at a time. One for Versed and fentanyl use, and the second one for marijuana addiction.
Wow.
So I didn't know people could get addicted to marijuana. Once again, I didn't know anything about it. So I hesitated. But then I decided, okay, let me go and check out and see who these people are who's coming for this marijuana. Really judging them, prejudging them. I knew what they were going to look like, probably Rastafarian, hippie-like, with a joint hanging out of their mouths, with Birkenstocks on. And then I thought, they just wanted my illustrious signature to use drugs legally. So I went to see who these people were. So I sort of forgot all my, hesitations and went into this place, and I could not have been more shocked. Because what I saw looked absolutely nothing like what I thought would show up. I saw retired businessmen, bankers, teachers, coaches, highway patrolmen, policemen who themselves had arrested folks for marijuana. I saw grandparents coming in. I saw parents bringing their babies in and their teenagers in. And I thought, oh my God, what is going on here? Who are these people? And some of these people were spending their last monies to get this card so they could buy their medicine. But most of them were looking for help, someone who could show them how to use this plant and would do that without judging them. They had heard about it on the internet or the street, who knows. But they had failed conventional medicine, and I felt conventional medicine had failed them. But there were problems with that. Number one, here I was, already judged them, and I knew nothing about the stuff. I knew nothing. And they sort of knew I didn't know anything. They would look at me with their arms folded. And I thought, oh my God, here I am, an anesthesiologist. We know physiology and we know pharmacology. And I couldn't answer a single question. Not only was I humiliated, but I was so embarrassed. I was just so embarrassed. And so I made it my mission. I was going to find out what was this plan all about. That's what got me started.
It sounds like you were kind of curious just to find out who these people were and maybe like confirm your suspicions.
Yes, and my prejudices.
So did you think that there was any merit to medical cannabis at all?
Well, not going in. But after seeing who these people were and the kind of questions, and you can see the need for help. They wanted help. You could see it in their eyes. You could see, hear it in their language, in their body language. And so I started reading, okay, what is with this plant? Why are these people after this plant? And when I read the medicinal benefits of this plant, then my next question became, okay, it has all these medicinal benefits. It's illegal. It's a Schedule I drug, and it's off the American Pharmacopoeia. Why? So I did a deep dive into the history of cannabis, going back and reading those congressional records of the 30s when the marijuana tax thing was passed. And that made me angry as a clinician, but also as a possible user. My mom had died with breast cancer 30 years before. I lost my first child to anoxic brain damage. Could something in this plant have helped them? I would never, ever know. I wouldn't know because it was ripped from us, not because it was a dangerous drug, which Schedule I says it is. It's highly addictive and no medicinal benefits and dangerous, but because of politicians, ideologues, and big businessmen like Randolph Hearst. There was no research support it being driven off the American Pharmacopoeia.
And when it comes to your coworkers, what was their understanding of cannabis? I mean, did you discuss this with any of the other people that you worked with and kind of, ask them where they were at?
No, because I had actually retired from anesthesia when I started in the cannabis clinic, and I was just sort of sitting home, just enjoying my little retirement, and got this call, this random call, would I help in this clinic? So I never really had a chance to. But you have to understand, whether I talk to them or not, the stigma behind cannabis and clinicians who use it, there is a target on your back. They're not ready, and they weren't ready, and they're slowly coming on to hear anything about something this controversial, right? Something this controversial. Right. So I decided two things. Number one, I was going to commit my time. I mean, I was excited. I was pumped. I mean, the more I read, the more I wanted to read. But I knew how to talk to clinicians of all types. You start with the science. You don't start with cannabis. You start with the science, the research that has been done. And when I start digging into that research in the science, now, mind you, research here in America was banned. No U.S. university could do research on cannabis, the plant. And that was pushed through by President Ford in 1976. There was one university that was allowed to grow it and to use it, and that was University of Mississippi. but no one else. But there was research going on in other countries, Israel, for example, and Spain, in France, and other countries that revealed so much about this plant, and not the plant itself, but by using this plant, the structure, we were able to find a physiology that's so amazing. And to me, it gives me goosebumps just to talk about it, that we didn't know
Huh.
we had. A physiology that determines how every single physiological system in our body works. It controls all of it. It is the maestro. This is what cannabis has led to. So, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam of Israel, we call him the Dean of Cannabis Research, gave us the 21 carbon structure of THC in 1964. He gave us the 21 carbon structure of CBD in 1963. They were able, in 1980, 89, they were able to radioactively tag a synthetic THC, because you couldn't use the real stuff in this country.
Uh-huh.
But two St. Louis University researchers, Alain Hallett and William Devane, radioactively tagged a synthetic THC and just sat back to see where it worked. And that blew the top off, neurophysiology, pharmacology, clinical application of cannabis. It was the beginning of something so amazing. We're still, we're still uncovering new things about this amazing physiology that was named the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in for one moment there, this is something that really many other doctors lack knowledge about. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. We were not taught about the endocannabinoid system. Certainly not me, because I graduated from medical school years ago, way before they found the endocannabinoid system, but certainly not before Mechoulam, gave us the 21 carbon structures, what we call these terpenophenolic compounds. But my daughters, who graduated in 2000, I think 2015 or 12, one of those, from medical school and finished their residencies, we knew this information during their time.
Hmm.
However, neither were they taught about this physiology, and I can't believe there's a reason for that.
Hmm. Can you say a little bit more about just why does it give you goosebumps? Mm.
I'm one of these people. I've always been, and you said it perfectly, curious. I've always been curious about everything. I love technology. I wanted it yesterday. As a matter of fact, I talked to my kids about in 19, I don't know, early, 76. I don't know when it was, but about just mining bitcoins. I was in my basement mining bitcoins, and my kids go like, "What in the world are you doing?" This was like, years ago. I mean, sitting there with my little mining in my basement. My kids call my mom's off the rocker, right? So, but I've always been curious about things like that. I just needed to know. I'm the kind of person, I want to see what's going on under the hood of the car. And so when I start reading about the endocannabinoid system, the receptors and the endocannabinoids, the cannabinoids our body produce to work on these receptors, and the enzymes that create them and break them down, and how they control everything about us, and looking at it at a subcellular level to see how these mechanisms work, to me, it's just fascinating. It is, I mean, it is the answer to creating better products, creating better services. It is in my mind, the bridge to reconnecting the body, mind, body, and spirit. It is that bridge,
Hmm.
because the endocannabinoid system, and we now know it's the endocannabinoid system is just a smaller part of a much larger lipid signaling system that fine tunes the body, and we call that the endocannabinoid ohm. This system, controls everything: our thought, our emotions, our eating, our learning, everything. You think that system is adjusting and readjusting to create whatever that needs to be. I mean, it controls everything about us. And I cannot, to this day, understand how we learned about physiology and no one saw this. The CB1 receptor is the most abundant receptor in the brain. With all the other neural receptors, dopamine, opioid, all those other receptors combined, the CB1 receptor is the most dominant receptor in the brain. How did they not see this?
Do you have any thoughts about that?
Not really. It's a puzzle. It's a mystery, and all I can think, there is no reason to study cannabis. Cannabis is a natural plant. It cannot be patented. So you
Mm-hmm.
have the FDA, and I'm not disparaging it, but this is interesting to me. So we have synthetic cannabinoids called nabilone or sesamet and dronabinol, which is marinol. They were both FDA approved in 1985 and 1986 to treat chemotherapy induced side effects, those severe and unwanted side effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
They FDA approved those in 95 and 96. They did not uncover the endocannabinoid system until 1990. So what that tells you is these two things were okayed for use before they knew how they worked.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Before they knew those molecules set on these receptors called the CB1, CB2 receptors. So here they released something they had no clue. The system wasn't uncovered until 1990. Now that's just an interesting fact, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It is.
and of course, nabilone and marinol are patentable. The plant is not. So once again, you have to wonder why. Really, why?
You mentioned, that you obviously it's been a little while since you were in medical school, and we don't have to get into ages or anything like that. But do you think that doctors who are currently operating right now, there's a benefit to them perhaps taking a class, or maybe even going so far as requiring doctors to take a class in some of this new science?
And I'm going to say an absolute yes. And this is the reason why. Because it's not about cannabis. This
Mm-hmm.
isn't about cannabis and should not be about cannabis. That physiology is something that every living creature has, except the insect. It's that physiology that lets us reconnect, the mind, the body, and that spirit. It's that physiology that explains to us why conventional medicines work or not work, why Ayurvedic medicines, Chinese medicines, Native American, and you can go on. Why these things work. It is the connector because you can look at the cellular and subcellular level and see how those different, what we call neurotransmitters or cannabinoids, are affecting these receptors and what is the response down line from a receptor being triggered. When we understand that physiology, then we can understand how to treat disease processes at that cellular and subcellular level. We'll understand how to treat patients with the different therapies, not just conventional therapy, but massage therapy, acupuncture, meditation, why all of those things work. And you can only get that if you understand the physiology. And to really, in my humble opinion, to completely take care of a patient holistically, you're going to need to understand that there's something more basic than the physiology we were taught in medical school. And patients are not going to stop using this because we're afraid to use it. Another example is, and the reason why I talk about the bigger picture than rather than just the endocannabinoid system, because now we're seeing, people moving into the hallucinogenics that works on the bigger endocannabinoid ohm. But once again, once you understand that physiology, then you see how different things in nature, different sources, products, herbs, practices work on that endocannabinoid ohm. And most of those things that we can use to help patients reach wellness doesn't cost money, at least not a lot of money.
Hmm. So this might be a tough question for you, but I think it's worth trying. I think that most people have, like you were saying, we all have a basic understanding of kind of school book physiology, and we
Mhm.
all have a lot of metaphors for
Yes.
how our bodies function. So the brain is the computer system, or it is the pilot that is
Hmm.
controlling and sending signals. Like,
Hmm.
do you have some metaphor or some way of describing it, like what the endocannabinoid system kind of is and what its potential is?
Okay. And that's pretty much really an easy question. It is the master maestro. It's like having an orchestra and your conductor is conducting that orchestra. And one instrument get off out of line, the whole thing sounds bad. And that conductor goes and correct that one instrument and bring it back in so it sounds harmonious again. So the main job of the endocannabinoid system is to maintain harmony or balance between all the physiological systems in the bodies, whether it's neurological or cardiac or GI tract or reproductive system, your skin system. Each of those systems have their own little endocannabinoid system functioning and interacting with each other, right? So the body is not just the brain, the body is a fine tuned computer. The endocannabinoid system is constantly working, to adjust and readjust to both external and internal assaults to that body, trying to keep us in balance. And when things get out of balance, then we move toward disease processes. So, what is that endocannabinoid system? And remember, I said it's a smaller part of a bigger lipid signaling system. But the conventional description, this is it: a CB1, CB2 receptors, a CB1 receptor located primarily in the brain in the central nervous system, but in or the organs of the body. CB2 receptor that's mostly in the periphery of the body and the nerve cells, the peripheral cells. The CB1 are neural modulating receptors. So anything neurological, that's what they're controlling. So when you use THC and you get those psychoactive effects, that's because it's working on that CB1 receptor, which is a neuromodulating receptor. The CB2 is an immune modulating receptor. So you have products that work on that CB2 receptor to fight inflammation, to fight diseases and pain and that sort of thing like that. So those are the classic two receptors. Then we have something called the endocannabinoid because ECS is a 600 million euro system. So it predates cannabis by far. So the researchers felt that something in the body had to be there that worked on the receptors. And so once again, Dr. Mishulam in 1983 gave us the first endocannabinoid that he called anandamide, or after the Sanskrit word ananda, meaning bliss. So it's a bliss molecule. 3 years later, he gave us a second endocannabinoid, and this was called 2-arachidonoglycerol, or 2AG. Both of these, what we call neurotransmitters, but they're the endo and made in the body cannabinoids because they behave like cannabis, are the most studied endocannabinoids. And then we have their enzymes that create them and break them down. Now that's the classic definition. And the things that throw the endocannabinoid system out of whack: number one, genetics, aging, pharmaceutical drugs, your nutrition, toxins in our environment, and stress. So you can imagine most people in ECS, endocannabinoid system, are out of whack with what's going on in our country now. You can guarantee people are stressed and that ECS is working overtime. So that's the classical description of the endocannabinoid system. Its main job is to maintain harmony, but it also repairs and it also protects. That's its job.
That's, first of all, thank you for that. And my relationship with cannabis was not necessarily as strong as your negative associations,
Mhm.
but I did perceive the world as having negative associations about
Correct.
cannabis. So I felt a
Correct.
lot of shame about
Yes.
ever using it, and it was the kind of thing that I was afraid to tell a doctor about.
Correct.
Um, Do you find that I mean, is that generally something that you see other patients experience? And how does that complicate your job? Like, what would you
Yes,
tell to patients who
yes,
perhaps still aren't comfortable talking about their cannabis use?
yeah. Well, once again, by the time they come to us, they've have either failed conventional medicine or conventional medicine have failed them, and they're desperate, but they're
Mm,
still afraid. They're afraid to talk to their family members about it or their neighbors. And some of them have tried to bring it up with their doctors and either get poo-pooed or they get labeled, drug abuser, or the doctors just will not talk to them about it. We've seen it all. And I think that's why they come to us, because they still want that medical input. They want to trust us. And they're looking for someone who they can trust, not to judge them and give them direction. They want to use this safely. So what I do when I have a patient come in, because I know they're already there, I just need to let them know why cannabis may or may not be a good choice for them. And it depends on the medical problem that they're coming to me for, right? But
mhm.
I always will give them a little bit of the history. I'll talk to them about yellow journalism, how they use marginalized populations to demonize a plant that was put here on the earth for us to use as medicine, that it absolutely had nothing to do with research. In fact, during the 30s, I think his name was Dr. William, oh, what's his name? I can't remember his last name, but he championed cannabis, and he didn't know they were talking about cannabis because they used the word marijuana, right? Um,
Oh,
Tried to champion and stand up for cannabis during the hearings, during the congressional hearings, and saying that it did have medicinal benefits. It should be researched more and should remain part of the American pharmacopoeia. But his testimony was ignored. And he was not only a physician, but he was also an attorney for the American Medical Association. So when you give patients that history, like myself, they get kind of angry. You make patients angry and make them feel or let them know they've been cheated out of something, you get a quick change in attitude. And some of them in our clinics, we have had people who will fly from other states that doesn't allow cannabis use to buy their products here, even when we warn
hmm.
them, it's illegal to cross state lines with THC.
Right.
They're to the point where, look, this is my life and I want to live.
Hmm. Just kind of going back to something that you mentioned before. I've talked to a number of activists who are interested in working for federal legalization, and they've mentioned that in their conversations with politicians, they often kind of get a response along the lines of, "Hey, look, we're open to it, we're interested." Um, but there's no American science, or we haven't done science here in the States. Like, is that a thing in the scientific community that, like, is foreign science bad?
And that's something that's a little bit hard for me to understand. I think in general, we Americans are very arrogant,
Hmm.
and sort of discount you know studies or research from other countries, and I think that's a huge mistake. I don't know how prevalent that is, but I will tell you this is that we'll point to over 20,000 plus articles in PubMed on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system, far outweighing articles on any drugs that the FDA has approved. There's more research been done on how cannabis works in the endocannabinoid system than anything else. And if they would go back and take the time to read that, not that I expect policymakers to do that, but I do expect policymakers to have some competency, because they're making policy on how people can or cannot use this. So they're playing with people's lives as far as I'm concerned. So again, back to what's really necessary, we need to educate everyone on that supply chain, from the person who put the seed into the ground and not really know what they're growing, to those policymakers that are making policy affecting how people use it for their health, to the dispensary assistant who's selling it across the counter. All of them need to know what they're doing. And we see a paucity in education everywhere along that supply chain.
Hmm. What are some of the misconceptions that you've encountered with anybody, policymakers, patients, anything that struck you?
Well, there's a lot. Sometimes you just not so much patients, but other folks,
Mm.
including clinicians, just willful ignorance. That always surprises me. Oftentimes, I have a patient who tell me that their doctor won't listen, or their doctor says it's not, there's not enough research. What I usually will do is send them back to their doctor with an article, a basic article on cannabis and the cannabinoid system. And I say, ask them to read it so they can have a discussion with you, just to get them started on reading something, right? Just to get them started. Um, but yeah, we can't educate people enough about this. And I think the more we do that, the more patients are going to feel comfortable with sharing what they're going to do. But, and I do see federal legalization as a double edged sword. I see it as a double edged sword. We want it for
Sure.
so many reasons, for banking and et cetera. Even with our clinics, we've been kicked out of bank accounts and credit cards, and we never touched a plant.
Huh.
Just because we associate with cannabis, we get kicked out. But people need to understand that cannabis does not mean, including policymakers, that you're going to get high, or you're going to go crazy, or you're going to become dangerous, or you're going to become addicted. All those things are misconceptions. That education needs to correct that. Not everybody needs to smoke. Most people do smoke still, but you don't need to. There's other ways of using your cannabis products. There's times when you may need THC and times when you may not. There's time when CBD or CBG or some of those other minor cannabinoids are going to be enough. My family and I, we call ourselves endocannabinologists. We're students and practitioners. And that word means that anything that affects that endocannabinoid system, endocannabinoid dome, we want to know about and learn how to use it so that we can affect health and what we call being well instead of being sick. So some of those old attitudes that people have on how they take it, what's going to do to them. And most people coming to us, particularly our older patients, I don't want to get high. I don't want to be high. I don't want to get, I heard about the anxiety and my heart's speeding up a little bit. It's just a matter of teaching them how to use it, right? You teach them how to use it if they need that particular cannabinoid.
So that's a great transition into kind of the second half of your story, I think, which is the rest of the Doctor's Knox kind of joining the team. How
Yeah.
what was that like? What was the process of finally becoming the sort of superhero squad, as it were?
Yeah. Yeah, I think both of my girls, and they had, I consider a huge benefit over myself when I went to medical school. When I went to medical school, I was the only black female in my class of 142 students, and maybe one of two or three in the whole four classes. Um, and I can't tell you how isolated and alone I felt going through medical school. And like there was really no one I could really, sort of resonate with because they didn't come from the same kind of background that I did. And I remember, they're asking me, they knew I came from a huge family. How did my parents love me enough that I made it to medical school? Or, how did I get my hair kinky and afro? I mean, those are the kind of things I dealt with in medical school. My girls had each other. They were classmates together, although they're 3 years apart in age. They were classmates through medical school. So I was really happy that they had each other because I remember how I felt going through medical school and feeling isolated and alone. But my kids look at me once again as this sort of disruptive kind of person. I mean, I'm definitely from Cal Berkeley. You tell me the sky is blue, I'm going to ask you how. Why? Why do you think it's blue? you know, I'm going to look for the reason. So by general principle, we call it GP. I'm going to ask questions. So I've always asked questions about things, and I gave the example of my, very early on, looking at Bitcoin and the blockchain and moving on to other things. I love technology, what technology can do. But as I moved into this cannabis space, and I was amazed. I mean, once again, goosebumps and just excited to learn about this stuff. My kids sort of looked at me with this eye like, what is she doing now? Mom has lost her marbles. Now she's into drugs. And so, but when I explained to them the endocannabinoid system and how, as young clinicians, they need to know about this. They were sort of disgruntled with conventional medicine because as they went through their training, they listened to disgruntled, attendings, disgruntled residents, and they're going like, my God, why do we want to do this? And so they were looking for other ways to deliver healthcare anyway. And when they saw my husband and I working in the clinics and the kind of stories we would tell, they sort of went like, And so instead of thinking we were weird parents off our rockers, they started learning about the endocannabinoid system themselves. They become intrigued. My daughter Rachel is the chair of the Oregon Cannabis Commission, and she's also started something called CHEM, which means Cannabis Health Equity Movement. And my youngest daughter, she's absolutely just brilliant. All my kids are brilliant. Is totally into helping us, teach and educate about this different paradigm, this disruption to healthcare. It's going to change. I mean, COVID tells us it's going to change. Our politics tell us it's going to change, and so we want to introduce this as an alternative or an adjunct to what we already have, and hopefully improve it. So they just totally bought into it.
We've seen that especially medical cannabis kind of had to find a slightly different identity. A cannabis product becomes like bliss or relax or something like that, rather than train wreck. I think it relates to a quote that I saw your daughter Rachel give in an article where she said, wellness, the whole concept of wellness is a white construct. People of color, by and large, do not have the luxury to pursue wellness. And is it a concern that in some ways legal cannabis is starting to become kind of a luxury product?
I think you're absolutely correct. And we watch everything very closely. And of course, being people of color ourselves, we see the people of color community, once again, being invisible, being discounted, because they've paid some of the highest cost for the war on drugs. They've paid some of the highest costs with their families, their communities, their mental health, and their economic health. And I really do see people of color with what I call PTSD or post-traumatic slavery syndrome because we've been so suppressed and ignored. And so you have this big boom cannabis coming along, and the very people who use that stigma to imprison people of color are the very people in line to make all the money. This multi-trillion-dollar industry is being led by white men in suits with the same business paradigm that they've always had. Not respecting the plant, not respecting people who came before them and produced the plant, and certainly invisible to communities that have been abused because of the stigma that they're now using to make money. And they're they have the money to make beautiful packaging and marketing, and they're putting these products out there. And we object very strongly. Number one, and you said it absolutely correct, when you're an endocannabinologist, like we call ourselves, we're looking at which cannabinoids you're using, which terpenes are you using, and why are you using it? So we call that creating products with purpose. What is the purpose behind your product? Why did you put CBD in this product, or CBG? Why did you put this terpene? And most of them can't even explain that to you. It's all about making money. That's a problem. It's all about making money. And now we even hear, because we give, talks and lectures at some of the big investment seminars, and they're throwing around this word, social equity. I detest that word, absolutely detest it, because it sounds like affirmative action to me. It sounds like, here, we'll give you your piece, go to the corner, be quiet, let's keep on doing what we're doing. And that bothers me. So I never want to hear about their social equity or their diversity or their inclusion. If you can't talk to me about equity, my place at that table with you, then we don't have a conversation. And we're talking to the same people, Wall Street bankers, investment bankers, big businessmen who have the money to make beautiful packaged products without purpose. So
Hmm.
yes, that's a problem. That's a problem.
There's another thing that your daughter talked about, which was that because of that history, specifically in communities of color and very specifically in the Black community, there's still a fear in some cases around cannabis, even in states where it's become legal. And I mean, I think there was a news story yesterday, an update in a case of a veteran who had a medical use card and, was caught with his medical cannabis in a state where it was illegal and is now facing 5 years in jail. So there's still ways to get in trouble. Is that something that you've encountered, perhaps a fear or a reluctance based on the history?
And that's the thing. We have these clinics. We've had these clinics for the last, I won't say 5 years or so, and I can tell you overwhelmingly our population is people of non-color because that stigma is still so pervasive. I mean, you think about the economic damage to families that have been ruined because of the war on drugs. They're not ready to grasp what this is all about. I mean, there's still that fear around it. And even to this date, even with the states that have, legalized it to a degree, you still see people of color being arrested 2 to 3 times that people of non-color for the same amount of product they may be caught with. So that's still real. And we also know that the problem with social justice in this country. It's not like they're going to be asked. You may get killed out there. If you're stopped and found with marijuana, something like that, in your car. So that is still a huge problem. And one of the things I think that we are trying to do is help correct that. Once again, we know that part of the work is going to be our going down into our community and re-educating them, showing them the economic opportunities that could be there for them, helping them to understand that it's not just about physical health, but emotional health, mental health, economic health. They need to understand that we're just not talking about taking cannabis as a medicine. We're talking about uplifting your community. This is going to be a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We need to be at the table. People of color need to be at the table. And I do believe cannabis is a connector. I think cannabis can turn the economy around if it's understood.
Have you noticed at all the term social equity perhaps being used in kind of a sloppy way,
Yes.
where it's not very clearly defined what social equity actually means, and it sort of implies diversity but doesn't actually guarantee it? And there's a lot of you can fill that to be whatever you want it to be.
Yes. What I really think it's. I think many of them have good intentions, but really do not understand what needs to happen, what needs to be done. Um, so I hear that word social equity is thrown out quite a bit by the money people because they feel like they have to do their part, to make this all fair. We gotta throw money at the NC2AP. We gotta give money to this. But it's not about the money. It's not about the money. To me, social equity sort of has become one of those words that you cringe when you hear it. And I know that they don't get it. I know they don't get it. It's part of our job to help them understand why that's, and along with inclusion and diversity, why those are not good terms for us to use. It's bigger than semantics. It still denotes an inferiority to those people because we have to give. We're going to give, you this, and we're going to assuage our conscience by giving you this. See, we did our part. To me, that's what it feels like. And I talked a little earlier about meritocracy. It gets to that meritocracy whole thing. If you work hard enough, I did. I worked hard and see where I am. If you work hard enough, you'll get there. But that's not true for people of color. We all saw that movie Hidden Figures, right? Hidden Figures were those three black women who helped put the first man on the moon. And I never heard about them until I saw the movie Hidden Figures. They weren't allowed to even put their names on research papers they wrote. They worked hard, but they were given no credit. And we see that all the time, over and over again, where we have to work twice as hard to get to the same place. It's just not good enough.
Well, and we are seeing in many cases in multiple states, because of requirements in licensing, delays, and just the way that these, well-intentioned or not, just the way that these programs have worked. Actually, opening a dispensary is not going to be feasible for most of these people. Like, financially, it's just not possible.
It's not possible. The system is designed so it makes it very tough. I mean, it's a heavy lift. And I've had people that I've consulted with who have had 2 or 3 places put aside. They're paying humongous leases on these places because all these things, they've ordered lights and they've ordered systems for security, and they have to have all of this in place before they get a license, and then they're turned down. They do not recoup that money. I mean, to me, it's just so much so wrong with the way it's being done. And people of color, once again, are being left out. They try so hard. They see this as a way, only to be turned down repeatedly and given to the chosen few. It's disgusting. It really is. It's very, for me as a clinician, for me as a person of color, it is very painful. Right? So it's not just throwing money at them or letting one guy open a dispensary. Say we gave one dispensary to them. It's bigger than that. It's leveling the playing field. I want the same pathway you have, but I don't want mine to have potholes. Mine have potholes right now. Yours is smooth. I want one just like yours, so that I can exceed and go ahead and be successful, that my children can succeed and be successful, my community can succeed and be successful. It's no longer acceptable to me to be invisible. It's no longer acceptable to me to have to work 3 times as hard to get the same thing you have. It's no longer acceptable for me for you to throw a few $1 million at me and pat me on the head and send me on my way. That's no longer acceptable.
Dr. Janice Knox is the CEO of Doctors Knox Incorporated. She is also the co-founder of the American Cannabinoid Clinics and the co-founder of the Advent Academy. Dr. Knox, I just thank you for all of your time. You're so giving. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for having me. Have a great day out in Illinois.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground@trichomes.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at trichomes.com and following us on all social media. The High Ground is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Batend. Thank you for listening.